who's haven't been relieving pressure. I see they've been missed passes.
The execution not quite there, not as sharp as you'd like it to be.
Steal the puck here and try to spring Tippett again. He's got it. Oh, and Tippett in on goal again. The backhander, he scores! Persistence pays off for Owen Tippett. And his drought is over, and this game is tied at 1-1.
Great job by Forster to intercept that play in the defensive zone. And look at this backhand. I mean, you got pressure coming down on you. He tried it at the forehand before, keeps it to the bat, and now as a goaltender, you're thinking, no way is he going to backhand this puck in. At some point, you're...
Hey everybody, it's Isaiah, and I'm here with Chef B, who's going to tell us about one of our sponsors here. Chef?
Yeah, O&B Puckcast is now brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. The winter months can be especially hard on our homes, from roof damage and peeling siding to frozen pipes and toilet overflows. Call Summit Public Adjusters before you call your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be stressful and confusing. Let Summit Public Adjusters take the stress out of the claim process by having our guys work for you. Get the most for your money and your repairs. The next time the big snow or the rain leaves you with some home damage, contact us for a free consultation. Summit Public Adjusters are licensed in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Learn more at summitpublicadjusters.com or call 215-752-0560. Just tell them that the chef sent you.
Yeah, what was that number again, Chef?
215-752-0560.
That's terrific. All right, we're going to carry on with the rest of our show. And we are back. It is Isaiah. Welcome to the O&B Puckcast, episode number 211, brought to you by FlyersNittyGritty.com. As the Flyers are back from the All-Star break tomorrow night in Sunrise against the Panthers, and they're coming off a 5-game losing streak. They've lost 2 games since our last episode. So after 50 games, the Flyers are 25, 19, and 6 for 56 points. That's good for third place in the Metro, but they're barely clinging to a playoff spot with 32 games remaining. There are 14 games left before the trade deadline. And according to Hockey Reference, the Philadelphia Flyers have a roughly 53% chance of making the playoffs. And as you know, this will change every single day. We're just having fun with it. And they think the Flyers will, as things look now, will end up with about 92 points. It'll help to have Owen Tippett back. Apparently that will be the case tomorrow. We find out officially. All indications are that that is the case. So let's go to our panel before we bring on our guest. Always to my left, it is Chef B. How are you?
Very good. Very solemn day today. I'm sure we're going to talk about some other stuff, but otherwise everything's okay.
Yeah. I mean, we'll get into some of that stuff. There's so many places to get granular detail about all the things like Hockey Canada and some of the other things. I don't know. We'll touch on it. We'll give you the facts as we know them, and we'll move on from there. As you can tell by now, the great Dan Silver is still away on his European trip. It's not a vacation. It's all work. But he will be back next week, giving us his thoughts and insight on everything that's been going down for the last, 2-3 weeks or so. And you can find him on X at dsilver88. So switching to our guest, without any further ado, he is the senior writer for thefourthperiod.com. You'll hear him as a host on the Sirius XM NHL radio and with his buddy, the mayor, on Kings of the Podcast. We call him DB. Welcome to the O&B Puckcast. Once again, Dennis Bernstein.
Hi, man. Chef, it's always great being on O&B with you. Thanks for the time. Appreciate it.
Man, great to have you on. And it's it's a crazy time for not only the Flyers, but also the LA Kings, the team you cover most closely, although you are a maven when it comes to what's going on around the league in general. The LA Kings have just gone through a 3-7-5 January. They've decided to part ways with their coach, Todd McClellan. And they're one of these teams that thought, hey, we're pushing the chips in. We think we're going to be a cup contender for the next 3 or 4 years. How do you see things going on there?
Well, this was the last lever that Rob Blake could pull, right? He went all in, went and got Dubois. It hasn't worked out, and everybody knows what his performance has been like here in the first 48 games. But this is tale of two teams. And Blake said it himself. The first 24 looked great, and the last 24 were not acceptable. And I don't care if you're Scotty Bowman or Toe Blake or Freddie Shero. If you're a contending team and you win 3 of 17, you're not going to be the coach. And as much as an affinity I have for Todd McClellan, I had a great relationship with him. And I've even, sent a few texts over saying, my status on the national media landscape has been enhanced by my relationship with Todd. It wasn't good enough. And certainly Rob Blake feels the pressure. He has to produce. This was the year that, they haven't won a cup in 10 years. They haven't won a playoff round in 10 years. It was time. They tried two times against Edmonton, failed them both times. Making the playoffs wasn't good enough. Was this a drastic measure? Yes, because the hard part about this is, sometimes you change a coach and the team quits on the guy. I've talked to a man on that team, to a man. They have not quit on him. They haven't executed. The structure is broken down. I think part of it, and certainly, Todd, I asked him the other day about the responsibilities. Is he responsible for this? He said, yeah. And I think what happened was, I think the first progression here is that they were getting scoring from all 4 lines in the first 24 games. And then the bottom 6 stopped scoring. In an effort to get going, he moved players around. Like he tried a Byfield at center for a game or two. He tried Dubois on the wing. He swapped out the bottom 6 guys. It didn't work. But when you switch these guys around, your defense suffers because the structure that they had in the 24 games to the start of the season wasn't there because guys were playing out of position, playing with different line mates. You didn't see the structure that you had, and that connects to the goaltending. Because the goaltending was solid in the first 24 games. But here's why. For Cam Talbot, Phoenix Copley, and to a lesser extent, David Rittich early on, they didn't need to have 40 save performances. The Kings didn't have to goalie teams. Like they were getting 22 shots, 25 shots, 24 shots against. You could, if you're a decent goalie and stopping the medium danger chances, you're going to win a lot of games, and they did. But when you start getting into the 30s and 35s and 37s, and you get a Cam Talbot was solid, but he's 36 years old, he's being overused. Then you have Phoenix Copley go down with an ACL tear. Rittich has been okay, but if you watch the last road trip, they lost an overtime on a shot from Braden Shen, and Braden's a great player, and nice wrist shot from 35 feet. But when it goes through your elbow and it goes in the back of the net, you lose an overtime. It's fine. I think the genesis of all this was, and I was on the road with the team in Florida, they lost in the space of, I think, 10 games, 6 1-goal games. And it got the team down. The confidence wasn't there. And it kind of built to a crescendo where Rob really had no choice. Like they had 10 days off. This was the time to make the change. You weren't going to go get a big name like Craig Berube or Jay Woodcroft or whomever on an interim basis. So they are going to get a different voice though, because what you get in Jim Hill, and Jim Hill is basically an unknown. He's been with the organization for a year and a half. He jumped on with the Islanders. Trent Yarney, who Todd's had a relationship with for decades, is not going to be the guy because basically it would be the same kind of message to the team. So Jim Hill is not an outsider, but he's not the ingrained insider with respect to the coaching staff. So in a microcosm, everything that's gone wrong has gone wrong when you have a losing streak to this. The worst part is, in juxtaposition to this 3 wins in 17, you have a team that won 16 straight, who's in your division. Right? You have another team that just made a trade for Elias Lindholm. They haven't lost in regulation in 10 games. So there was additional pressure. And the whole thing is, you guys are seeing like, oh, wow, the Kings are really bad right now. They're still a playoff team. They're still the one wild card. Like they have games in hands on teams. And I'll tell you, on paper, they're better than Seattle and Calgary and Nashville. Right? I think the last final note when they made this change is they went on the road after losing games to San Jose and Buffalo. And I think that was a genesis, because let's go back here indulge me for a couple more minutes here. 18 days ago, I asked Rob if that was an option. He said no. Changing coach was not an option. They went on the road. They were home. They lost to Nashville. They lost 2-1. They beat the Rangers, who they never beat. They don't match up well against the Rangers. They won that game. That was Jonathan Quick's comeback to Los Angeles. It was an emotional game. you would thought that would be the game they would build off of. And what did they build? They did the opposite. They lost to San Jose in overtime at home and Buffalo at home, up 3-1 in the first. I think that was the genesis of all this. They went on the road, and I said, look, they could lose 7-1 in Colorado. Colorado's way better than them right now. That's not going to be the genesis for a coaching change. But they went to St. Louis. I said St. Louis and Nashville. St. Louis, they got a point. Nashville, they won the game, but they got outshot, I think, 42-23, and they got outshot 18-3 in the third period. And Nashville hit 4 posts. So if that was the luckiest game of the season for the Kings, if it wasn't, I don't know which one is. I think that performance in this last game, Rod said, I have no choice. I have to get a different voice in there, and that's where we stand today.
Yeah, there are some parallels between the Kings and the Flyers in that when the Flyers look at the Kings, the LA team is about 2 to 3 years ahead of where the Flyers want to be.
Yep.
But this is an example of even when you think you're going to push the chips in, you're going to hit some bumps in the road. It doesn't necessarily mean that the plan won't work, but sometimes you have to make moves like this.
Yeah, and you do because, again, not making the playoffs wasn't good enough. Again, it's been 10 years since they won a playoff round. It's not acceptable for a team that had designs on competing and winning for a Stanley Cup. And this was supposed to be the Dubois trade, the last move, the piece of the puzzle where they got better at center. And the thing about Dubois is he didn't have to be a superstar. He didn't have to be Connor McDavid. He had Kopitar and Deneau. So he had cover. If he could have been a dominant player on the third line, he would have had all the advantages of the matchups, and it just hasn't happened. So, yes, there's a lot of pressure on this team because the expectations are ridden. This was the year. Look, maybe not win the cup, but win a couple of rounds. Go to a conference final. Get out of the division. And right now, the way it looks, it's not happening. So there's certainly pressure on Rob Blake, certainly, and maybe even Luc Robitaille to some extent with respect to their future. If it keeps going south and they don't make the playoffs, that's not negotiable based on what they did this summer.
Yeah, absolutely. So it brings to mind, you look at what the Kings are going to do moving forward. And I guess you can have like one of two different stances. You could say, hey, let's see what we have in-house with guys like Turcotte, who's rebounding from an injury, Kaliev, who previously was reported to maybe be available. They had some chemistry in the past, maybe put those two together and maybe can generate a little bit of something under a different coach with some different configurations in the lineup, or they could maybe go a little bit bigger and go out into the trade market and press their luck in that regard. Do you have a sense of where they might be headed, or it's going to take another 5 or 10 games to get to that point?
No, I think the key individual is Victor Arvidsson, who they have sorely missed. And Rob even said it. He goes, you look at what succeeded here, they're number one in the penalty kill. And again, going back to if you're a bad coach, you're not number one in penalty kill. You're not, because a lot of it is structure. A lot of it is effort and willingness to pay the price. And so that's how I say, okay, they never quit on the coach. They just didn't get the results. But when Victor Arvidsson comes back from injured LTIR, which he may even practice with the team on Thursday, maybe the time that they get in a road trip after their game against Edmonton here. And that's some way to come out of the break, right? Like, okay, we want to right the ship. And you get Edmonton at might be on a 17-game winning streak. When Arvidsson comes off LTIR, and the all expectation is he's progressing toward that point in time, it's going to revert back to what this team had in the beginning of the season, where they're going to carry one extra player. They're not even going to be able to have a full roster here. They went all in. Arvidsson will certainly help the power play. And people forget, they kind of, a lot of people in Los Angeles, a lot of fans minimize Victor Arvidsson's absence. I mean, you consistently talk about what Gabe Velarde's doing in Winnipeg, but he's missed over 20 games. So he's not been that impactful a player. But when Victor Arvidsson came, he was a 60-point player. He was second on the power play in points last season. This was a massive, miss by this. And remember, it wasn't only just Arvidsson missing, but Velarde got traded. Sean Durzi, who was a really good quarterback, has gone as well. So the power play has suffered. And at this point, I don't think they have any, if they go that route, if they're active at the trade deadline, I think what would happen is, I think it'd be because they would be a seller. I think they would be moving guys. If this continues in this manner, where they continue to lose games, and let's say they're maybe 6 or 8 points out of a playoff spot at March 8th, you could see Arvidsson getting traded if he's healthy. You could see Matt Roy, who they haven't had conversations with, who's unrestricted at the end of the season. It may come to that, which would be a stunning reverse. It's already a stunning reversal, a fortune for the Kings. But I don't think they're going to be in a position to add. I know people have talked about goaltending. I don't see it. I don't think the Ducks, at least right now in the middle of the season, are going to help out the Kings right now. Right. So, and I don't know if Dan Vladar would help this team at all, or Jake Allen would, and you'd have to make, you'd have to trade a player with some money unless they're going to retain Montreal, which I don't know why they would. I don't see a lot of ads here because this team was built to win. The expectation, well, we don't have to add the deadline. If anything, maybe we get a fourth line forward, maybe some toughness. But at this point in time, I still think it's what you see is what you're getting in LA, and there's not going to be any big moves at the trade deadline. Now, depending on the results of the season, you could see very big moves in Los Angeles.
Gotcha. Chef?
So if we're drawing parallels to like the Kings and the Flyers, your guys are supposedly a little bit further along in the rebuild than we are. But if I'm looking at it now, if I'm looking at the Kings and the little hiccup or stumble that they have right now, is there any lessons to be learned for Flyers fans? Because in Philly, we're crazy. We're crazy.
Yeah, of course, you're nuts. You're all nuts.
But there are people out there are being, it's like, this is unreasonable. They should be losing. I don't think anybody ever wants to lose. But in this step, is there things that you can say to us or draw the parallels to keep the fans in check, so to speak? Like, this is a process. It's not going to fix in 1 or 2 years, even maybe 3 or 4. So.
Okay, so a couple things on that, Chef. So do you remember the games that this team played when Mike Yeo was behind the bench? The lack of engagement, the lack of try, the lack of everything, the lack of structure. Like, people have short memories. I know people got really excited, and look, the Flyers overachieved. There's no question. Like, they were the 2 or 3 seed in the division. Nobody had them there, even 35 games in. Like, have some patience. So the parallel I would draw is behind the bench. Torts came in, established structure, benched guys. Number 86 had a nice seat on the bench that one game, right? He put in structure. He put in commitment, willingness, compete is back. And I've said this, and, I talked to people. I'll give you an example, okay? How important this franchise is to just the landscape in the NHL. We had a gathering in the NHL All-Star Weekend. We had a little after party after the game, and the first 2 guys to show up were David Amber and Kevin Bieksa from Hockey Night in Canada from CBC, right? So, and we started talking about Philly and everything else, and the league is better when Philadelphia is relevant, without question. And you're talking to a guy who, way back when I had brown hair or blonde hair, was a Flyers fan. Like, I was in college when Bernie Parent led them to 2 Stanley Cups. This league is infinitely better when the Flyers are relevant. And it's not true for all 32 markets. I'm not going to name other cities, but this is an important franchise to the NHL. So I think that the structure is here. And certainly I think the willingness to compete is here. And you have to have that first, Chef, right? From there, which has already been established, then you need to import talent. On paper, is it a championship team? Absolutely not. Should you be proud of your team that they're overachieving and they're playing hard every night and you're coming back to Wells Fargo? Absolutely. That should be your takeaway for the season. Like, we have a team that gives a crap. Like, that will play for our coach and play hard, despite all he's a dinosaur, he's a retread. He's done a great job, Chef. He really has. But now the question is with John is, when you get elite talent in, can he still coach that type of player? He can coach, the guys who are hustlers and bottom 6 guys and a guy like Sean Walker and things of that nature. If you import elite talent, and sometimes there's been questions with respect to the coach coaching elite talent. But, man, if you're not happy about the change of course of this team over 2 years ago, when it's to the other parallel. I went to games 3 years ago in Los Angeles. Toronto would come in 2-0 after 5 minutes. You knew the game was over. It was over. It wasn't going to go back. Same thing with Philly. I watched these games and I saw 6. Look, I have an affinity for the Flyers in Philadelphia, right? I think it's a great city, a huge sports city. Great. I want the Flyers to succeed. I think it's better for the league, as I mentioned. And when I sat there and we watched on the package, and it's 2-0 after 7 minutes, and there's 6,000 people at Wells Fargo, that's sad. That's not how it should be. So if you're not satisfied now about the steps this team has taken, and it takes time, Chef. Like, hey, I got news for you. Connor McDavid's played 9 years in the league. He hasn't won a Stanley Cup. It takes time. You have to get patience, and I get it. There's been different regimes going on, but you can't worry about the past and the other regimes. You have to look at this regime, and do you believe in them? Do you have the faith that they can add to this roster with this, with what they've established here early in the Torts' regime? And can they get to a point where they, look, if they played the Bruins in a 7-game series right now, they'd lose in 5. Who cares? The fact that they would play them in a 7-game series is a huge win. I think it's a huge win in the progression, but it's not done. And it's not unlike what Dean Lombardi did in Los Angeles. He had to establish, he always goes talk about the boxes he had to fill, and he put in infrastructure. It's getting there. It's going to take a little while longer because pound for pound, it's not there. I mean, thank goodness you found Owen Tippett, right? I mean, come on, look at that. But the next step in the process is taking the young talent, either developing them or trading futures and getting more established talent.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at where the Flyers kind of on the skids the way LA was, maybe not to the extent that LA went through, and certainly not with the expectations that you carefully explained. But a lot of it, again, that parallel, the Flyers are up 3-1 versus Ottawa right after they had lost the game, and they blow that game. And that kind of really took the air out of their tires, much the way with the Buffalo game did to the LA Kings, a game that really kind of signified that a change really had to happen. So on top of that, they lose Owen Tippett against the Colorado, but the big blow, of course, is in goal. And without getting so much into Hockey Canada, the Flyers face this final 32 games without the assurance of having one of the best goaltending tandems in the league. Instead, they have Cal Peterson, who's the first candidate to back up Samuel Ursan, who I believe only has about 35 or 36 NHL games, playing really well. But it's a lot easier to play well when you have that cushion of knowing an established starter is your tandem.
Yeah. Well, look, if you have any expectations about Carter Hart playing this season, you should stop right now.
Yeah.
He's going to be indefinitely suspended until this is adjudicated. And you know how the courts run. The courts run the same way in Canada as the U.S. It takes a long time. There's already one hearing that was adjourned. It's going to take a while. These guys have lawyers. Now there's going to be cap relief from the Flyers. So do you go replace them? Would you replace, like an example, you look at the approximate cap hit. Could you replace Carter Hart with Jake Allen? You could. That's an option. But, and the challenge for guys like, and I think all 4 guys who are still active in the league are all out of contract, either unrestricted or restricted to the end of the season. They're in limbo. They're in limbo. And if they get to a point where they go to trial and they are found guilty of charges, a guy from Canada is never going to get back in the U.S. So, and if you're another team, and certainly does Carter Hart have trade value? Well, before this occurred, it did, but now who's going to take that risk? These guys are in limbo. And Gary Bettman said one very correct thing at the press conference. These guys need to concentrate on facing these charges and not worry about their hockey, future. And I think a lot of them, it may have been the last game they've played in the NHL.
Yeah, I don't think there's much doubt that it's in doubt. That's for sure. But I mean, if you think about prorated $3.9, almost $4 million Carter Hart's salary, it'll be broken down in the future as to how that actually plays out. Yeah. But looking at the trade deadline, the Flyers have a couple of different candidates. In fact, some of them made the TFP trade list. If you go to thefourthperiod.com trade watch list, scroll down just about a quarter of the page. One of the names on there is someone you're very familiar with, Sean Walker, who has played probably his best hockey in his career, and a lot of it's system related. And he has the right partner in Nick Seeler, a fellow overachiever. It looks like with the acquisition of Jamie Drysdale after the Cutter Gauthier affair, that he seems like a guy they're going to part ways with.
Yeah, it's the handwriting's on the wall. When Jamie Drysdale got traded, I'm like, okay, that's going to open up the window to the trade. And Sean's a great guy. Knew him in L.A. And remember, he had an ACL and MCL tear. That's so difficult to come back. It takes 2 seasons to get back. So last year was a challenge. He was playing his offside. If I'm a GM, guys, I want to trade for both those guys. I want to trade for Seeler and for Walker and use them as a pair if I'm a contending team. I'm happy for Sean Walker. He'll get paid. He was healthy. It's as simple as that. He's quick. He can move the puck. I get it. But yeah, I got to think at this point in time, Danny's going to trade him, right? Because there really isn't an option. And if you were going to keep him, you would have announced the extension already, right? That would be done. It wouldn't be an issue. So I think Walker will help somebody on, second pair, third pair. I'm glad that he's had a redemption season, but at this point in time, I would be shocked if Sean's still on the team past March 8th.
Yeah, in fact, statistically, those two are one of the better pairs in
absolutely.
expected goals against in the league, probably in the top 12 or so. But looking at the trade watch list, and we know that Sean Monahan and Elias Lindholm are already gone. Could this shape up in the next few weeks to be a trade deadline? Because a lot of trades are actually going to go down before we even get to that point.
Don't ruin my trade deadline. I mean, that's what we work for at TFP. Come on. Here's the thing, right? And you mentioned center position. So there's one guy who's unrestricted at the end of the season who could definitely help. And the one team that could maybe tip the scales if they decide to be sellers, and I assume they will because they're way out of it, would be Anaheim. So the one guy you look at would be a guy like Adam Henrique, right? Who's taking more. If you look at his numbers, his faceoff numbers, he's taking way more faceoffs as a center this year, which is a precursor to maybe Pat Verbeek going and say, okay, he's played center most of the season. So could a team like Colorado or the Rangers be looking at him fine? And I think it was maybe it's my buddy Johnny Lazarus, who's all over the place right now. Says, imagine if you were a Ranger fan 5 years ago, and you woke up at the trade deadline. We're looking into the future, and Adam Henrique and Jonathan Quick were on your team. The two guys, really responsible for knocking your team out of the playoffs over the last couple of years. So it's going to be interesting to see. So I think at this point, what you're going to see, Isaiah, is that there isn't a lot of help at center. And most teams, what do they fortify at the trade deadline? The middle or the defense. So now you have to look at guys who maybe have term, who aren't expensive. The one guy who I really think could make a difference, and I think you look at a team like Colorado. Right now they have Ryan Johansson as their 2C. I think he's got 7 assists. He's probably better off as a wing. He's got more goals than assists. And I don't think you can win a championship with that player there. A guy who I think would be really good, but he wears a C. He's not expensive. He's got 2 years left on his term. Boone Jenner in Columbus, I think would be a fantastic add to some team. That would be the type of move that like a Tampa Bay makes. Remember when they brought in a Gourde or a Barclay Goodrow, right? That's the type of trade. That could be a guy that's going to be difference maker. But you're right. It could be a dud of a trade deadline. I mentioned Duck, so I'll always throw the other names. We already talked about Gibson. He's a possibility, but he's at 6'4" cap hit. That's really hard to do when all the teams are up against the cap, at the trade deadline. And you have Frank Vetrano, who's been great, but they're going to be looking to put younger players in there, and they have a lot of prospects. And the other guy's Lyubushkin, who could be a depth add like a Walker or a Lyubushkin or Sealer. That could be an ad. So they're going to be active, I think, as a seller. The other team is not what's going to happen with the Flames. You talk about defense. What's going to happen with Kristanov? Is he finally going to go to Toronto after 9 years of speculation? I'm kidding about the 9 years. And then, what happens with Hannafin? And the weird one is Hannafin, because you've heard probably 5 times a change in status on Hannafin. He wants to go. He's not interested. Oh, he's interested. The team's interested, but maybe he's not interested. Like, he's got to make up his mind. Does he want to stay and sign a long-term deal with a team who I think is pretty far from contention, or does he want to go to the market and be traded to a contender? So I think when you look at the teams that might help the trade deadline, certainly the Flames because of the 2 defensemen. And then if you have any particular need, you could call Pat Verbeek if it's forward, if it's defense, if it's goaltending. So look at those 2 teams. But I am concerned that even if there are guys out there, the quality of the players, and you talked about our TFP list, who was the top of the list, Lindholm, and now he's gone. So I just think that the trade deadline day is now no longer a trade deadline day. Like you see, guys, earlier and earlier, these trades are being made. So maybe you don't do 8 hours of coverage if you're, TSN or Sportsnet, because this could line up as, the big names. And if some of these names come off the board that we just mentioned, it's going to be even tougher. And I just think that when the team has, I think what happens is that you want to get these players in sooner to acclimate, because here's one thing, and it also goes to the coaching change in Los Angeles. There's not a lot of practice time. Like, you don't have a lot of practice time to put new systems in and get chemistry going. So if you bring in a Lindholm or a Monahan now at game 48 as opposed to game 60, it really helps your team. So I think that a lot of these GMs are saying when we make these acquisitions, we need more time, and we can't wait to the last minute to pay the price for these teams. If we meet the price, we want the player in now. And so that's why you see that the last couple of trade deadlines haven't been that impactful, because you see a lot of depth guys go. But the big name players, because you want to get them on your team earlier, they seem to be going earlier than the final 24 hours of the trade deadline.
Gotcha. Chef?
So you threw out some names there. There's another name on the Flyers roster that's been He was out there last year and the year before, and he seems to be out there every year. Scott Lawton, I know he's got that little bit of center experience. We here on the O&B feel he's a better winger than he is a center, but regardless, with the acquisition of Lindholm and several others that are happening now, does that like increase his value? Because we're hearing stuff like they might not trade him if it's a third round to kill the room because he's the only guy that wears a letter. But if it's a high second or first, I mean, you have to make that deal, correct? I mean, you make your team better.
Yeah, and the example would be, and I gave Boost Brew Joe, my buddy on SiriusXM, the gears over the weekend about this. So let's talk about Sean Monahan. I went on the air about a month ago with Bruce. We had the discussion with Steve Coolius, and I said, by the way, I think you can get a second round pick for Sean Monahan at the trade deadline. And he's like, there's no way. And then Sean Monahan started playing better and better. And they got two first round picks for that guy. They got him when they traded for him. They got him. So could Scott Lawton get you a first round pick? No, I doubt it. I mean, as solid as he is, and he's not expensive. What is it? $3 million cap hit. He's unrestricted in 2026, right? But he's got 5 goals and 15 assists. So he's a middle six forward for a championship team, right? Or maybe a fourth line player. What do you got? So what's the value coming back to, or as opposed to keeping him and keeping him part of the solution? That's the question. Do you think he's a core player? And maybe not from an offensive standpoint, but do you think he's part of the solution? Well, and I would say I'd rather keep that player, because what you tell me what the return's going to be on it. I think his value to this organization is better than, let's say, a conditional third round pick.
I'm a 50-50 on that because they just signed Ryan Poehling, and many people reading the tea leaves felt like kind of similar player, faster, younger, kills penalties, does a lot of the things Lawton does. Lawton's kind of a Swiss Army knife. He's in the realm of a Boone Jenner, and don't forget, Lawton had his best year last year, so he has a track record of playing a little bit better. But maybe he's aging out. It's hard to say, but I could see them moving on, but. Again, if we're talking about a third round pick, they're not going to do it. It's got to be that second round pick or higher, like Chef talked about, I would think.
Yeah. It's like trading him is not going to solve. It's not going to really enhance. Third round pick. It's a lottery. Look, here's my take on prospects, and people know this. They're all lottery tickets. Sometimes you buy your lottery ticket and you win and you cash out. Oh, it's great. I'm going to get or I get a free ticket. And sometimes it doesn't. So I don't know what that third round pick would be. I'll give you an example. The Kings traded, and Rob Blake's getting a lot of criticism these days, but they made a trade when they got Elias Anderson, like, who didn't work in New York. They traded for a second round pick. You know what second round pick was? The Will Kelly kid who's on the Rangers right now, that big forward who's doing really good things. Like, you don't know that. So maybe that third round pick turns into something. I think for that player, because he's more of a glue guy, I'd rather keep him, unless, like you said, if somebody's going to give you a second round pick and a conditional or a mid-level prospect for the guy, of course you're going to trade him. You might drive him to the airport. You might hire him an Uber to get him to the airport. I just don't think you're going to get that return unless somebody thinks like this is the guy that can solidify our bottom six and make us a championship contender.
Rasmus Ristolainen has playoff defenseman written all over him. He's got a term on his deal. But that term is, what is it, $5.1 million for 2 more years. Is that going to scare off some teams, or is that more of an off-season deal if something like that did happen?
Yeah, I don't see it. Plus, if you're still in the one thing I haven't talked about, if your guys are still in a playoff spot or 4 points out, what kind of signals that send to the team and to the fans? Okay, we're building something here, and we're only 4 points out, and we go on a little bit of a streak. So you're trading a guy, who has really had a redemption season, and I'm going to trade a 16-minute-a-night defenseman, and who are we going to replace him with? So I would think that would be an off-season trade. I think that would be something they would have to go through a streak like the Kings have gone through to move that player before the deadline. Now, could it happen in the offseason? Absolutely. But right now in the moment, I think that, again, I think it sends a bad signal to the room. Right. It's as simple as that. And I'll always reference back to what Dean Lombardi told me way back in the day about the trade deadline. He wanted a sign from his team that they wanted help. So it's incumbent upon the Flyers in the room to play well, play hard, and say, hey, you know what? We've hit a rush patch here. We're still in it. We still are confident. We're still a playoff team. And if they do that and they show Danny that, then he may add at this point in time. I just think if you trade with things would have to go really south here, which I don't think they will, because again, there's more structure, there's better defense, there's more engagement. So I don't think the Flyers are going to fall off the cliff. And if they're in the playoff conversation, keep that player, make a run, see what happens, and then the offseason address if you want to move them on from him or not.
Gotcha. Last one from me, TB. Turcotte, interesting player. Flyers have a real dearth at center.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big issue, especially since a Gauthier trade, because they were going to try him at center. They can call him a left winger all they want. They were definitely going to try him down the middle.
100%.
He's been injured a lot. He has a comeback year at the AHL, has recently been promoted. What do you see his future being in LA, or is he trying to establish that right now as we speak?
Well, if you wanted a youngster out of Los Angeles, it would be Arthur Kaliev, because there's been reports that he's asked out for a trade. And I asked Rob Blake about it, and, he's been in and out of the lineup, hasn't seen eye to eye, and he's regressed. He's had 6 goals in, 36 games. And Rob said, you know what? Every player's upset when they're not playing. Turcotte, here's the thing, Isaiah. They've waited so long on this player that why would you trade him now? He's finally healthy. He played in Nashville, played a really good game. It's funny. Their fourth line won them the game in Nashville. He looked really good in the 2 games he played in. You've waited so long. It'd have to be one hell of a deal to move this guy out right now. So if the Flyer fans looking for a guy like Alex Turcotte to come in to supplement the lineup, I just don't see it happening. Again, remember, he's the 5th overall pick. He has talent. He's been just so banged up here in Los Angeles and the organization that I think now you finally get to a point where he's healthy and he's in the NHL. I certainly think next season he's part of the solution. So again, it'd have to be a really, really substantial deal to put Alex Turcotte. I'm not saying he's not untouchable like a Quentin Byfield is right now, but I think it would have to take a massive deal to get him out of LA right now, because he's finally showing signs that he could be part of the future here in LA.
Gotcha. Chef, you got any more for DB before we let this gentleman, hardworking man, get back to the family?
I would just ask this. Is there anything, my opinion is and I'll stick to it at the beginning of the year, I thought the Flyers were going to miss the playoffs by about 4 points, 2 to 4 point range. I'm still going to stick to that, because I just think that in this stretch here, they're playing too many tough games. Kings, I thought that they were going to barely squeak in. Now, does any of that change what you're seeing now towards the trade deadline, towards the playoffs?
Well, I think from the Kings standpoint, Chef, they're a wild card team. They're not better than with all the stuff that's going on with Edmonton. Vancouver hasn't lost in regulation in like 10 games. They're 8-0-2 coming out of the break. They're not going anywhere. Vegas, once they get healthy, is going to be there. And Edmonton, I don't know, are they ever going to lose another game? But I do chirp my friends in Edmonton by saying, you know what? You need to win those 16 games in May and June, not in January. So it doesn't really matter, right? The Kings are still a playoff team. With all that's going on here, you forget the fact that they're the one wild card, right? I agree with you. And I think a lot of the experts, a lot of the pundits think that it's been a great season for Philly, but there's going to be some regression here. And they reference the last 5 games, right? So, yeah, it could be they're a 91-point team and miss by a couple. It doesn't mean the season's a failure, though, guys. Like, if they would miss by 2 or 4 points, that's a massive – go back and look at the prognostications early but in the preseason, where this team would finish. If they would finish 2 or 4 points out, you know what? Here's the thing. I thought Buffalo was the team this year. I really did. This was going to be the year, right? They missed by 1 point. Thompson's great. They got a lot of young talent, and what did they do? Right now, you'd rather be a Philadelphia Flyer fan than a Buffalo Sabres fan. And that's where I think. So I agree with you on both ends. People still believe that the Kings are going to be a playoff team because their overall underlying numbers are still pretty good. I think the Flyers, again, it doesn't matter. As long as they don't drop and they're 12 points out. If they're still playing, here's the thing. I always say this. If the Flyers are playing games of consequence in late March and early April, you had a good season. Simple as that. Doesn't matter where they land. It doesn't matter. You got to be relevant. You got to be playing important games here because it's going to help this team. It's going to help the younger players to go through because this is like the play. I'm talking about, you need to have playoff experience. The last 20 games of the NHL season, the way the standings are the playoffs anyway. So it's important that they play in really important games, the youngsters, a guy like Jamie Drysdale, who's never played an important game in the NHL, playing with the Ducks. I think that's achievement. I think that's an accomplishment. That's something that's a positive for this season. So I agree with you. I think they missed slightly. But again, when you look at teams around them, well, Washington's got issues, and now Kuznetsov's going into the player assistant pen. Who's believing the Islanders, even with Patrick Waugh? They may get in as a 2 seed, but there's Detroit, and there's a couple other teams. But right now, I think if they got to a 90-point total and they missed by a couple, you can certainly, that's the platform you need to build off this team to get it to 100 points, to get it to contender status. So again, I think a miss for the playoffs. While some people might be disappointed, they're not looking at the big picture.
Yeah, plus it might get them a shot in the lottery. You never know, right?
You never know.
They got that year they got 07, was it 17? They got Nolan Patrick.
I know Philly fans are tough, Isaiah, but it's already, to me, it's already a success. Unless they lose every game of the season now, this is a successful season. You turn the corner. Like you bounce back, you bottomed out and you bounce back. And these are the progressions that you need to take. You don't go from last to first, even though St. Louis did it inside of one season. It's not how it works. I'm sorry. It just doesn't work like that. I think this is a really successful team, a season for the team, and I'm happy to see it.
Yep, absolutely. DB, fantastic. Where can people find your work, and what do you have coming up new with the fourthperiod.com?
Well, I think the question, Isaiah, is where they can't find me, because I seem to be everywhere these days. Okay, so let's see. I'll be on this Friday from 3 to 6 Eastern with Steve Cooley is co-hosting the Power Play. Every Saturday, 11 to 1 Eastern, Sirius XM, me, Dave Pagnotta, Ryan Payton, the Hot Stove. But we are going to be going to Stadium Series, and we are going to be doing a 2-hour pregame show for both games, for Flyers, Devils, and for Rangers, Islanders. So you can catch us on the 2-game. If you're driving up from Philly to MetLife Stadium, which is one of the boringest stadiums you've ever seen in your life, because there's absolutely no character to it. But so we're going to be doing that. The fourthperiod.com, my X or Twitter or whatever they call it these days, handle is Dennis TFP. I'm pretty good with engaging the fans as long as you're not a donkey and have some terrible takes. So if you can't find me, it's probably your fault.
No disagreement there. DB, thanks so much. Look forward to having you on again.
Yeah, hey, great being on the O&B with you guys. Always a pleasure.
All right. You take care now.
Thanks, man.
Later, D.
Okay. Well, that was great from DB, as usual. Chef, DB with a lot of good information there. I think the rumors are hot and heavy about Lawton, and people were talking at first. I think what could happen with both Sealer and Lawton could be conditional. Mm-hmm. So they could get a second round, but it could turn into a first under certain conditions. And that might be the compromise for one of those players. Walker is definitely going to go. I don't think there's any doubt. We all agree about that. Sealer, it sounds like they want to sign him. In fact, Elliot Friedman said he'd be more surprised than not if the deal doesn't get done. He also said that the Flyers are really made up their mind that TK is part of their future, and they look to sign him. It's not as certain as it would be with Sealer, because with TK, they got to wait till July 1st because, he still has another year to go. But they appear to be very determined to sign TK. Maybe something could come up. I think you trade a guy like TK if you can get a young center. Other than that, he's going to be 26, and I think most of his career, he is 26, and he'll be 27. And I'm looking this up as we talk. Yeah, he'll be 27 in March. So you can make the case that maybe about 2 or 3 years of a long-term deal might not work out too well. But I've seen players like Corey Stillman, his size, that play his way, be pretty effective for a long time. And the way he's being utilized when the penalty kill and playing so many different roles, his game could grow and he could build value in other areas that haven't even developed just yet.
Well, I will say this. I said from what Steve brought up, and what let me address what you said. TK, yes, I think they're going to keep him because if you look, they got to start somewhere, and they're already a little bit further along, I think, than they expected to be in this process. I thought that they thought they were going to get Cutter, but that didn't work out. But they got Drysdale now, and that's the defense has been like the surprise plus on this team anyway. But and so you got to start somewhere, I think. And Sealer, I think I even said it like in a couple shows early in the season. I think I mentioned Shane Malloy, his theory on it. That sometimes when you look at you trade something and then you got to replace it and you end up paying like $1 million or $2 million more, and you kind of like breaking your budget because you could have had somebody on a homegrown for a cheaper value. So that's good. I think all that's reasonable. But one thing he did say is that I thought was interesting was he was talking about how Flyers fans should be happy with what the team has done this season, even if they missed the playoffs by like 4 points or 6 points or whatever he said. Because that's true. I really believe that. I think that they should be, happy for their team that they showed this much improvement and stayed relevant as long as they did. But there's another reason though. You got a lot of guys out there that are really negative on the Flyers about the coach, about the process, about ownership or whatever it is. And they're quick to sit there and yell out Stepford wide Flyer fans, like just you're towing the company line, you're doing this, you're doing that, and they can't now. They've been so happy complaining for the last 7 to 10 years that they can't figure out a way to be comfortable around this team, a team that's showing that they're better. In the past, this team hasn't gotten better. It's been better for a couple games, but in general, this team has grown and been better. So I just think that's everybody needs to take a step back and look at this realistically and go, okay, if they do miss it by 4 to 6 points or within that range, then it's still a win.
I agree. The idea that the Flyers could compete and come down to the last couple games and just miss and get pushed into a position to make the lottery, like I said earlier, it might be the most ideal scenario. They gave it the honest effort. It didn't work. And here they are with a slight chance, however slim it might be, to get a higher pick than they ever imagined, let alone the idea that they would be in the middle of the pack in a decent draft year. But more about, the trade deadline is Tortorella, again, emphasizing in his availability yesterday, actually it was today, Kevin Kurz had a blurb about it, that even if you talk about guys like Lawton and they're really important so-called glue guys, if they have the right value coming back, they can't fall in love with players. And he said, if it's the proper asset that's coming back and we're going to lose one of the players that are a big part of building this in the right way now and where we're at this season, there will be no hesitation. So I think that pretty much addresses that. If he's saying that, and Jones and Briere are really the biggest advocates for taking the long view, even more so maybe than Torts, because he wants to win every game, then I don't think there will be a hesitation, and there may be some more guys in play than people think. Although I do think it's likely to be Walker for sure. Outside chance, very outside chance, Steeler, and Lawton is now in play because of the centers. I think Lawton might have more value than people think from a national perspective because he was so good last year, and his ice time, it was some of the hard minutes that Scott Lawton has had to take. There might be some teams that really have always coveted him. And I remember many situations and many trade deadlines, or just whenever they did make an acquisition, you would see a line in there in the article, the Flyers had coveted this player for a long time. So even if he's not having the best year, now the other teams that are in the playoffs are the ones that are in that position. So we'll have to see. During the break, I don't think we got a chance to talk about how Owen Tippett gets signed to an 8-year, $6.2 million AAV contract. It seems like a no-brainer at this point. Some people actually were a little concerned about it, but you have a power forward. This guy is really a brick in terms of a build, and with that kind of speed, and if he slows down, he can always just do with the Thomas Vanek thing in front of the net, and he's working on a shot. He wants to get better. He's everything the Flyers could have asked for in the Giroux trade, where G just gave him no options, and he's still, from a really good general manager, got that kind of value. And they had the other draft pick coming up that coming up this year, or is it 25? The Florida draft pick.
It's this year,
right? So if Flyers did well there, what do you think of Tippett resigning?
Well, I like it. It actually. I think you did that special last week with Anthony DeMarco, right?
Yep.
He kind of alluded to it then. He was what he was hearing. He was right on the mark. He was ahead of everybody. Props. Yeah. Give him props. He beat out everybody on that. But Tippett, I think and I kind of have to agree. I think he turned it on. I don't know if he got a hold of Travis, one of Travis Konecny's sticks, right? And all of a sudden it's like, woo, there to go to goals, So, but I just think, and what other people have said on other podcasts and other scouts have said that I've read around, that he still has a next year or two to get to. So that's very, very comforting to know. So now, it's good to know that in a year or two, that when you're looking to bring Mitch Koff over, and maybe you've got somebody ready to come up from the minors, or you're ready to test that, free agency market, that what you still have on this team, you got somewhere where you're not starting at the very bottom again. You know what I mean? So right. Like you got other guys that could score. So now it becomes, this team is not a 1-line, 2-line team anymore. Maybe you got a third line that's relevant and a very hardworking fourth line if you still have Torts as your coach. And so it leads me to, to sit there and go, okay, I could see the future building around this team. And I really wish Dan was here, because he laid it out. If you're not following Dan Silver 88 on X, look at this past week, he tweeted out what the new the cap breakdown is going to be after all the signings and who's going to be available. And it really does sit you go, oh, wow. Because when you see it like that, with he highlights colors of teams that are contracts expiring, ones that are still good and ones that are going up next year, and you look at it and you go, wow, you can actually see what Danny and Jonesy and Torts are all doing to have these pieces line up. I think it's very good. So check that out too.
Yeah, it's actually at D Silver, just the initial, D Silver 88. They might be searching all day. You never know.
You never know.
Where did he go? We got lost overseas. No. He just did the initial. So, okay. So real brief, we touched on it a little bit earlier. Today, Carter Hart, they announced that he officially had been charged with 4 other members of the Hockey Canada 18, charged with 1 count of sexual assault, as all of them were, with the exception of Michael McLeod of the Devils, who actually had 2 counts of that. Now, just a couple details, and then we're going to move on. I prefer not to marinate in this subject because there's so much good reporting with, I think it's Rick Westhead and Katie Strang from The Athletic. If you want granular details of everything, go there. They'll give it to you. All I can tell you is that this is going to take, like DB said, a long time. It's been predicted by some legal experts that are Canadian-based that this could go till 26. And these guys are going to have to worry about their lives off the ice. And it doesn't look like Carter Hart's going to be playing goal anywhere anytime soon, if ever again. It's an uncomfortable subject to think that someone who you had a certain idea in your mind about who they were. You never know. A persona is not the same thing as who you really are, right? We all know that. But it is tough to think about that. So if we're talking about a sexual assault, he pleads not guilty. And Hockey Canada comes out with a statement about how they have changed some things since then to try and prevent these guys from having that BMOC, big man on campus kind of environment that leads them to feel like they're indestructible or that they can get away with anything. And I'll let everybody judge about how well that works out. That's all I can say. We got to move on. The Flyers, there's a season to play. There's 32 games to play. The Flyers are going to have a challenge. And Chef, that brings me to the next subject of like, what was one question mark the Flyers didn't have going into this season in goal, and what was clearly their strength through almost 50 games is now the biggest question mark, because relying on Cal Peterson, or what I think, I could be wrong, will eventually be Felix Sandstrom.
Yes.
And one of those guys is going to be the running mate, unless they want to take some of this money that they're being given back by the league. And I just want to make sure that I have this correctly stated, that they were going to get credit from the league. And bear with me, where Darren Drager announced earlier that they are going to prorated credit on that, have been informed that they will receive cap relief for the players on leave charged in the 2018 World Junior criminal proceedings. So I would imagine it will be prorated. I don't know. So check some of the pundits, local, national, and they'll break that down. I know that Carter has a salary, like I talked earlier, 3.9 and change. I don't know if that's going to change their plan, though. Do you think that if they did get cap relief, that they would be players for a goaltender? Because I don't see it. Not in a rebuild here.
No. And I'll tell you why it doesn't make sense. Because they might experiment with Cal Peterson, maybe in a couple things. But if they feel like they're catching a groove, and I firmly believe this, if they feel like they're catching a groove and they go on that winning streak like they did earlier, or maybe like go 7-2 or 6-1 or whatever, 5-1, I think that Cal goes back down, because nobody's going to claim his salary through waivers. Let's face it. Now this time of year, this is where you're going to get, like, if you bring up Sandstrom, somebody could pluck him. That's a deal that you can't pass on. It's a chance you can't pass on that he might be something. So I think that if they try for a little bit with Cal Peterson, they'll throw him. And I think also too, why would you do that? You've got so many guys in the pipeline, and Ovasov, he's done at the end of this season, so he can come over next year. He might be AOL, so AHL, not dial up AOL. He could be on AHL next year. So you do have moves. I mean, and like you said, you're not playing for the cup this year, and this isn't something. You don't have to overthink it, I think. And I think too many people are going, we have to have a number one backup too. You don't at this point, because for all those people that wanted to tank, shut the hell up. This is your point. This is your chance now. And for all those other people that said, oh, we want to win, well, give Urson a chance. I think not Urson a chance. Give him a chance, and then and bring up Sandstrom. If you're feeling that he might have to pay 12 games, 15 games maybe. So I think you take that chance. I like my chances better with Sandstrom than I do with Peterson. So, and then you just know in the next couple of years, they got 6 goaltenders in the pipeline that are going to be worth paying attention to at least.
Well, I mean, with Sandstrom, the thing is, neither one of these guys has played well. I think he has a higher ceiling than Cal Peterson. But here's the deal. 32 games left, only one back-to-back, right? And not a lot of heavy travel. I think they go out to the Midwest one more time. I got to go to Toronto, which is not really a big travel spot, on the 15th. And obviously they start in Florida. But I think you're going to get, from a backup out of 32 games, probably at the most, like 8 to 10 games. They're going to play Urson. As long as they play him and don't run him into the ground. Remember, he's their guy next year too.
Yep.
They are going to get this cap relief toward the trade deadline. Let's shade toward that subject before we wrap things up. I think it does give the Flyers some flexibility to either hold salary or take a contract that normally they might not have been able to, even with the prorated amount. And they've done a good job not putting Brian Ellis on long-term injured reserve up to this point. they have that option as well to facilitate something. This is why the Flyers might be a little more active than some other people would have thought. So it just depends. And it might just be a contract that is expiring this year, and that opens up some things. So keep that in mind. This is an actual significant event. I'm sorry. Well,
that's okay. Just also, too, don't forget, don't count Danny out and don't count Keith out, because look at what he did with Provorov in the trade. He found it was a three-way trade. There was a lot of pieces and a lot of moving parts in that trade. So I don't doubt that if you give him extra cap space, that he could take a contract and do this for one season. There is no doubt in my mind that he can get very creative to do something. He seems like a very savvy guy so far.
Well, I mean, that deal for Krug, as well as Sanheim played at least earlier in the season, would have yielded yet another first-round draft pick. So, and the way Sanheim's played like the last 15 games has not been good. You know, that's the thing about Sanheim. Shep, I think he's just a second pair defenseman. And if he's with the right partner, like a real alpha dog, he could be like a number 2 guy, but that's it. He's really like a 2-3 guy. And I think they've been driving his minutes a little too hard. And I think it's taken away from his play. And I know he's a guy that definitely needed some time off as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of this team was just getting block shots, run down a little bit. And I just think it was the perfect time for them to do a reset. You got a little 5-game skid, a little beat up here and there. You're going to get Tippett back. You know, I just think, especially the defense, because on all these guys, because they're blocking so many shots this season. I just think, and to their credit, they're all in doing it. It's nice to see them get a little bit of a break and like a little heal up here. And that way they can get at it again and show that, you know, they want to be part of the rebuild in this team. So,
and that's the thing. I mean, we talked about it earlier, I think, you know, about 2 or 3 shows ago, if not longer, we would know by late January or February whether the way they have to play to beat the really good teams and to win down the stretch would take its toll. And I think we've seen it has. Now, I understand that losing your top goaltender, even having a guy like Ursan outplaying him for the most part, is going to take some wind out of your sails as well. So that's part of it. But I do believe the larger piece of this is the fact that they have to work so hard to get goals 5-on-5 and to score so often in so many games this year, and to defend. They've had to block so many shots, be so structurally sound and mentally attuned to what's going on. And it all kind of fell apart those last 5 games. And nothing signified that more for me than the Ottawa game. They're up 3-1, and then it just craters from there. And of course, they lost the last 2 versus the Bruins, and prior to that, to Detroit. Yeah, so that was not fun. 3-0, and they couldn't score. Did you see the alumni game stream?
I saw bits and pieces. I couldn't get all of it. It kept kicking out on me, so I didn't. But the overall, what I can say is this: everything I did see that they put out, it took you back like 20 years, 15, 20 years. You felt like the Snyder family was still out there taking care of this team. And the old feel of this team came back, especially with the alumni game. You saw that, and by all accounts, they rolled out the red carpet for everybody. They made it feel like we were family again. And if you bleed orange and black, you know, you really couldn't say anything bad about what happened. I mean, a lot of good stuff happened. Recchi scoring, and then Watson's last game. So I mean, 80 years old, and he took
Mike
the ice.
Richards. Mike
Richards. And I'm burying that too. Yeah, there was so much going on, and I just think it was nice because with the way the team is working hard now and playing hard now, it was another way to feel like, okay, maybe they're back. Maybe this team is back. Maybe this franchise is back. It was redemption for the franchise, let me say.
At least for one night. hopefully they can carry that through. And of course, they had the 50th anniversary of the Stanley Cup, which they won when I was 14. And when they won again in 75, I went down to see them at RFK Stadium, which is no longer there, of course. And it was a hell of a good time. I think Lincoln Financial Field is there right now, if I have my geography correct. Yeah, it was a blast. It's been a while. It's been, went down last week, and it seems like so much has happened since then. But it was, at least for one night, a hell of a lot of fun. And a lot more fun than the All-Star game. I don't even want to get into that. I didn't watch any of it. I'm not interested in any of that. I got to be honest.
I would watch some of the skills competition. That's the only thing that interests me, and that was about it.
Okay. Yeah.
It's taking it downhill. Remember what I'll tell you what, nothing was more exciting when, years ago when Jeremy Roenick hit 4-4 on the target thing. It seemed like some other, there's, I think if you got, like, they have the unique ability for some of these, skills competitions, put some cash prizes in there, get some incentive, get a little bit of that competitive juices flowing.
Well, that's why the games. That's why the games were more competitive this year, from what I heard. But I didn't watch it. I'd be lying if I said I did. But speaking of competition, just to give you an idea, before we go, I know we said we were going to go a couple times. Just the Flyers have 56 points in 50 games, and behind them, wild card number 1 is Toronto with 58 points in 47 games. Detroit, same number of games, 50. But they have 58, and the Islanders have 52 in 49 games. The Penguins, who are a plus 12 goal differential, the Flyers are actually a -1 right now. They have 51 points for 46 games. So they got 4 games in hand. They go right by the Flyers if they make those up properly. The Devils, who are getting Jack Hughes back, 51 in 47. So they have 3 games in hand. Even the Capitals have 51 and 47. And if there's a miracle, in 49 games, the Sabres have 48 points. And I don't think they're going to. I think it's really going to be the Islanders, Penguins, Devils, Capitals, and Flyers that are competing for that last spot, whether it's in the division or it ends up being for the wild card.
Well, if you look at that and what you had said before about the draft, now the Flyers could be 1 point or, until they go on a skid here. If you all you have to do is lose 2 or 3 games to one of those guys or all of those guys, and all of a sudden you're sitting like 7th in the Met. Or in or you're screwed. You're out of it.
Playoffs, right.
But you've already helped yourself in another respect. So that's why I think, because when I made that guess at the beginning of the year where they would be at, they wouldn't make the playoffs by like 4 to 6 points. You had to look at the back end of the schedule here and see, you're not traveling like you did at the beginning of the season, but you're getting a lot of division games, conference games, and they're going to mean a lot, especially to teams that have a lot more skill level, even though they're behind in the standings and games in hand too, like you said.
Yeah, especially teams like Jersey, Pittsburgh, whatever you want to say about them, they have some players that are in that realm of talent that the Flyers just don't have. So it'll be interesting to watch that and how it breaks down. So the Flyers come back tomorrow in Sunrise, Florida, and then they're back home to play the Winnipeg Jets on Thursday. They play the Kraken on Saturday night. It's not a matinee, so just relax. And then they play, I think it is the Coyotes on Tuesday, the 12th. And we might come back by then and talk to you and take it from there. And then, of course, the 17th, after they play Toronto on the 15th in Toronto, they play that Stadium Series game against the Devils at 8:00 on a Saturday night. So there's still some drama left in this season, and there's still a lot to look at to root for with this team. And of course, you have the trade deadline and all kinds of things happening today alone. Finding out the Flyers are getting cap relief, and Tippett is back. So it just never. It's a soap opera, Chef.
Yep.
It is. No doubt about it.
You got to pay attention every day.
That's right. And with that, we're going to call it a wrap. Thanks for listening today. And until next time, everybody, take care.